We will talk next about how the Yemeni armed forces took over the city of Marib. Now, the city of Marib is of strategic and economic importance in the Saudi war against Yemen, and the control of Ansarullah over the city of Marib is considered the beginning of a new chapter in the war against Yemen. Ansarullah's control of the garrison, which was the headquarters of Mansur Hadi's forces in the 7th Military District, disturbed the forces and led to the advancement of Ansarullah towards the city of Marib, which is home to the Ministry of Defense of the resigned government and coalition garrisons and other very vital oil facilities. Ansarullah liberates Marib in this following report.
Saudi Arabia is desperately trying to save its face from the predicament of the war in Yemen, as the Yemeni armed forces have successfully taken back the Marib province. No area in the northern part of Yemen now remains in the hands of Saudi Arabia or Saudi mercenaries, as Ansarullah prepare to exercise their sovereignty over all those areas. The Saudi defeat was even heard echoing in words of one of the senior commanders affiliated to Abdrabbu Mansur Hadi when Yemen's armed forces took over a strategic military base in Marib. The forces of the National Salvation Government had long ago liberated the Al Jawf province, which is located in the northeast of Sana'a and bordering Saudi Arabia, and purged it of the presence of Saudi mercenaries. Recently, with a military operation in Marib province, they took over the largest strategic military base in the province called Mas Garrison. The city of Marib is of strategic and economic importance in the war on Yemen, and the control of the Yemeni armed forces over the city is considered the beginning of a new chapter, if not the final one, in this war. Ansarullah's control of the garrison, which was the headquarters of Mansur Hadi's forces in the 7th Military District, disturbed the Saudi forces and led to the advancement of the Yemeni armed forces towards the city of Marib, which is home to the Ministry of Defense of the resigned government and coalition garrisons and other vital oil facilities. The Yemeni armed forces had pursued the policy of deterrence for more than a year now, targeting military sites deep inside Saudi Arabia and hitting the Jeddah oil refinery with ballistic missiles. The measures that Ansarullah government is taking now are aimed at deterring Saudi Arabia and continuing pressure on the Saudi coalition, as a result of which Saudi Arabia would have no choice but to sit behind the negotiation table and, while accepting the ceasefire, lift land, sea and air siege of Yemen that has continued for 5 years and 9 months. The battlefield victories have even pushed the Saudi government to complain to the UN Security Council against Ansarullah after their retaliatory attack on its refinery in Jeddah. In other words, the Saudi invasion of Yemen for 5 years and 9 months was ignored, but Ansarullah, which is defending itself with deterrent measures, was sued in the Security Council. This complaint only shows the Saudi weakness and helplessness in its confrontation with Ansarullah.
To discuss this issue with us from Sydney is Jay Tharappel, member of the Yemen Solidarity Council. Thank you very much for being with us, Jay. Now, General Yahya Sariya, Yemeni Armed Forces spokesperson, announced last week that the Yemeni army attacked the Tadawin camp in Marib Governorate, where Saudi occupation forces are stationed. They targeted with ballistic missiles, killing at least 8 Saudi soldiers. Now, Saudi-led mercenaries' morale has been sapped, and they are in a state of sheer panic, to a point that a senior commander of the militants had reportedly ordered his henchmen in despair to even sell their homes in Marib and just leave. What do you think will be the next phase after maybe liberating the city of Marib?
Well, firstly, I believe that the senior commander who you mentioned is the infamous Ali Mohsen al-Ahmar, based on a report published yesterday by the Yemen press agency. Apparently, he pleaded with the Saudis to allow 10 military leaders and 7 civilian leaders to flee to Shabwa, because they simply don't want to fight the Yemeni resistance anymore. It's poetic justice in a sense, because from 2004 to 2010, Ahmar was in charge of the Yemeni army when it attempted to wipe out the Houthi movement militarily. Now he's begging the Saudis to allow his militia to run away from the front line. To answer your question, supposing that Marib is liberated within the next few months, we can probably expect a ceasefire, negotiations, prisoner exchanges. You can expect Yemenis to defect from the Saudi side to the side of the resistance, which is what happened last Thursday when 25 Yemeni mercenaries defected, most likely because they want to be on the winning side. Taking Marib would also be a huge blow to the blockade imposed by Saudi Arabia, A, because the Marib province has oil fields, and B, because east of that town is just empty desert all the way to the border with Oman. And that explains why the US and Saudis are putting pressure on Oman to designate Ansarullah as a terrorist organization, which Oman is refusing to do. And if Marib is liberated, then the Saudis will have to rethink their entire strategy, and that's because they're faced with Yemeni missile capabilities that are getting better and better. According to Yahya Sarey, as you mentioned, the spokesperson for the Yemeni resistance, of the 15 who were killed or wounded, 8 were Saudi commanders. So they're not just ordinary mercenaries. These commanders were responsible for authorizing indiscriminate air power in their attempts to hold Marib, which is why last month we learned that 5,000 families had been displaced. In retaliation for these war crimes, the Yemeni national resistance took out the commanders who were responsible with absolute precision, and this is what worries the Saudis.
Well, with the takeover of Marib province, as you said, no area in northern part of Yemen now remains in the hands of Saudi Arabia or the Saudi mercenaries for that matter. And now Ansarullah government will exercise its sovereignty over all those areas that they have taken over, especially the southern border areas with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Now, it doesn't seem though that Mohammed bin Salman will accept this defeat. What do you think his options are, especially that Trump still has like a month or so to leave office?
Ultimately, the options on the table for Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, we'll call him for short, depends on whether the US continues to support this war. Without US support, Saudi Arabia would lose this war very quickly. Supposing MBS wants to continue the war, then Trump leaving office can become a major problem. And that's because the Democrats and the President-elect Joe Biden have promised to end US support for the war on Yemen. In April last year, the Democrats voted in Congress to end the war, but it was vetoed by Trump, which is perhaps the single most evil thing that Trump has done throughout his administration. Now MBS faces Joe Biden, and he's promised to end US support for the war, which he did back in May last year. And I think this is because Biden is being pressured from below. One US politician from the Democratic Party who deserves credit for this is Rohit Khanna. He's been trying to end the war since September 2017. And more recently, about a week ago, 80 anti-war organizations put their names to a letter demanding that the President-elect Joe Biden end US support for the war on Yemen. So given all of this, I think MBS knows that his government is increasingly isolated when it comes to Yemen. Turkey and Qatar are against the war. Oman refuses to bow to US-Saudi pressure. And inside Yemen, Saudi Arabia are on the verge of losing their biggest ally, which is the Islah party. So this means that the Yemeni national resistance will keep taking back territory. Then the areas controlled by the Saudis will soon disappear. Therefore, the only real option for MBS is to look for a face-saving exit.
Well, despite that, and despite winning over Marib by the Yemeni forces, Saudi Arabia's aerial bombardment of residential areas in Sana'a have continued unabated. Now, despite the bombing, however, the Saudi-backed forces have not scored any decisive victories against the Yemeni armed forces in Yemen's north, for that matter. Maybe are these Saudi aerial campaigns capable of possibly maintaining leverage over the Yemeni armed forces, maybe despite the fact that they are having ground victories? Would that actually stop the Yemenis from advancing?
I mean, just 4 days ago, the Saudis bombed Sana'a International Airport. So to answer your question, not really. And that's because all the facts on the ground demonstrate that the Saudis are not only losing territory, but also losing control over their own mercenaries. A week ago, the Saudis arrested 15 of their own mercenaries because they were accused, that is, the mercenaries, of cooperating with the Yemeni national resistance. And many defectors have accepted amnesty from from the government in Sana'a. Also, the Yemeni resistance now has counter leverage in terms of its missile capabilities, which I alluded to before. Now the Yemeni resistance can deliver accurate cruise missiles, which you mentioned in your prelude to this. And these cruise missiles are capable of bypassing Saudi air defense systems. Not many countries in the world have cruise missiles. It's sophisticated technology. They cost around $1 million each. They fly really low and fast. They maneuver around hills. They can change direction. They
and
can
it's all Yemeni made, and that's very important. That's Yemeni made.
Yemeni made, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Marib Governorate,
right.
Jay, is inhabited mainly by Islahi supporters, these people that you were talking about earlier, and they are the Muslim Brotherhood group that fought against Ansarullah in Sana'a when the war started in 2015. Now, do you think the fall of most of the strategically important areas of Marib under the control of the Yemeni government led by Ansarullah forces, maybe who are on the verge also of securing very important areas like the Raghwan and the Midgal districts just northwest of the provincial capital, the last stronghold of Hadi's fighters and the pro-coalition forces there? Do you think that this advancement might actually kick off maybe talks with the Islahis instead of starting new rounds of clashes?
Well, the Islahis are in complete disarray, and that's because back in 2017, the Saudis supported them against the UAE-backed southern separatists, but now the Islahis believe that the Saudis want them to cooperate with the Emiratis, which they're not too happy about. So in other words, for Saudi Arabia, appeasing the UAE is more important than appeasing the Islahis, who are now being driven out of Marib as well. Many Islahi politicians work in Saudi Arabia, but many of them don't feel safe anymore. That's because last month, Saudi Arabia's Council of Senior Scholars issued a statement calling the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization. After that happened, many Islahis fled to Turkey, which is an enemy of Saudi Arabia, including Abdul Majid al-Zindani, who is one of their top leaders. And frankly, who can blame them, especially after what happened to Jamal Khashoggi? So now it looks like the Islahis are being driven into the hands of the Yemeni national resistance. And there have been many defections. Take, for example, Sheikh Mohammed Ali al-Khuzaie. He was a prominent Islahi military leader. This is a guy who fought the Yemeni resistance in Marib. But in July, he joined the resistance. Why? Because he now believes that the Houthis are defending the sovereignty and independence of Yemen. Up until now, the only reason the Islahis have refused to turn against the Saudis is because many of their leaders are in Saudi Arabia. But once they all pack up and leave, we may expect them to join the Yemeni resistance, at the very least because they want to end up on the winning side.
Well, too bad that they took that long, but eventually it's good for all of Yemen for that to actually happen. I want to thank you very much, Jay Tharappel, member of the Yemen Solidarity Council, for joining us to talk about the new advancements of the Yemeni armed forces in taking and liberating the city of Marib. Thank you very much for being with us, and thank you for watching. Please stay tuned next week for more from the Mideast Stream.